Good morning, everyone, and I add my welcome to our international visitors, many of you, and of course that bodes well for the future of our sector. Thank you very much, Peter, for your warm introduction. It shows I'm experienced, not old. That's the key point to be made there. I think it's reasonable to say, Peter, that industry leadership in the agriculture and agribusiness sectors is patchy. And sometimes I think unproductively conservative. But in my 4 years in the portfolio, I've been impressed by the strength of leadership, the professionalism of leadership shown in the grain sector, and I congratulate you, Peter, and everyone involved. As Peter said, this is the third time I've addressed this conference, and as Peter indicated, the first time I did so as the Minister. A long reign as Minister for Agriculture, I think 12 weeks, Peter. It was, but a period I enjoyed very, very much. But this conference is quite nostalgic for me because it was my first outing as the Minister. So on that occasion, I just simply took the opportunity to introduce myself, talk a little bit about my background, my passion for agriculture, and I suppose what are my guiding principles as a politician in terms of policy making. That is a belief in free and open markets, a commitment to the market, and a view that government should not be involved unless there is a clear case of market failure, and that market failure has been clearly demonstrated. On the second occasion, a couple of years ago, I shared my hopes for the farm sector, better natural resource management, greater market access, greater natural resource allocation, more value-adding, smarter branding, and greater levels of investment, including foreign investment, all those things that we need to give the sector the lift in productivity and competitiveness that it needs to meet all of our collective aspirations. But in keeping with your conference theme, I thought this year I'd talk a little bit about and reflect on a changing political climate. I know some of you were in Canberra last year for my NFF Congress speech. Some of you might remember that is the one where Barnaby Joyce accused everyone in the Labor Party of being communist in front of the Chinese ambassador. But it was an interesting speech. I'm not sure the Chinese ambassador enjoyed it as much as I did. But back then I spoke about the unravelling of what have been or were once considered unshakable political allegiances and the risks involved in not acknowledging and adapting to what is very much a changing political dynamic. In that speech I referenced the unexpected global election and referenda outcomes of the last couple of years. You know them all. And indeed the declining major party vote, primary vote here in Australia. And indeed, I think it's fair to say that in the 10 months since the NFF Congress last year, that change has been ongoing. And if anything, that change has accelerated. Now, I just returned from a holiday in Italy and France on Monday morning, so I'm feeling pretty fresh. But everywhere I travelled in Europe, political revolution and the rising tide of protectionism was in the air. Very, very strong feelings there. Indeed, a visit to Versailles I thought was a timely reminder of the consequences of out-of-touch leadership. In the end, the elitist, arrogant and born-to-rule attitude of King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette cost them their heads. In more recent but less dramatic uprising, the major parties failed to make the final cut in France's presidential election. In recent contributions to the political debate, I've made the point, or I've suggested, that people need to think hard about what the alternative might look like before seeking radical change in politics. And only time will tell whether our friends in Europe and the United States should have thought harder and longer about the choices they've made. But I stand by that view. But voters in the end have very few choices, particularly when they're feeling disillusioned and disenchanted. And voting for someone else or something different to them often becomes their only choice. By contrast, I'll submit that politicians have many choices, and ignoring the feelings of their people, as King Louis found, is always the dumb choice. Now, that's the message I heard in Europe over the course of the last few weeks, and it's the message I'm constantly hearing here at home. With real wages falling, prices rising and income inequality growing, too many people are feeling left behind. Equal opportunity is only possible when people feel the economy is growing and, of course, they are reaping their share of the benefits. So politicians have an obligation, in the end, to lead and persuade, to make the right and tough decisions. But ultimately, we are obliged to represent the will of the people. And a business-as-usual scenario is not what they're looking for at the moment. Many European politicians have learned this the hard way. Not as harshly as King Louis, but harshly just the same. Now, this is not an argument for policy capitulation, anything but. It's not an argument for a leap to the left or the right on the part of our politicians. Rather, it is a call for honest, empathetic and smarter policy thinking. It's a call for real leadership. Now, I thought Bill Shorten made a very useful contribution in a speech only a couple of weeks ago when he kicked off this debate about inequality. Inequality is not just a problem for some. It's just not a problem for people at the wrong end of the stick. It's a problem for all of us because it impacts on our productivity, it makes economic reform harder and fuels anti-immigration and protectionist sentiment in our communities. So acknowledging a problem is always the first step in correcting a problem, and I think that's the real value of the debate we are currently having. And to those who just sit back and argue that all the data suggests that people have never had it so good, do so at their peril. Absolutely do so at their peril. Like Marie Antoinette's "let them eat cake" line, it can only end in tears. Now, amongst the losers will be our entrepreneurs, including our farmers, processors, traders, logistics operators. They need a government capable of managing the public mood, not one which misreads it, or worse, ignores it. Now, the punters aren't anti-business. They are not anti-profit. They are not doers. They understand the role business and entrepreneurship plays in the economy, in growing the economy and creating jobs. They know open trade as an exporting country is important to our economy. They understand this. What they are against, though, is unfairness. They are not anti-foreign worker, as long as they know they are not displacing Aussie workers. They don't mind paying taxes, as long as everyone is paying their fair share. They are not anti-banks, but they are anti-bad behaviour. They don't understand why income taxes are rising for lower-income families, but falling for those on high incomes. They never heard of trickle-down economics, let alone understand it or believe in it. They are all adults. They don't ask for all that much. They ask for a fair day's pay for a fair day's work, and equal opportunity and the best opportunity for their children. Now, these aspirations are a continuum in our society. They've always been there. And while aspiration has rightly risen, expectations have risen as the economy has grown, the level of frustration and disillusionment in our communities has risen much more. Now, this is the new dynamic the current government seems not to understand. And that's bad for our trading prospects. It's bad for our economy as a whole. It's certainly something I believe Barnaby Joyce does not understand. The Deputy Prime Minister's first instinct always has been to attempt to double down on his appeal to what he believes is his natural base. Now, there are two problems with this approach. First, the reality is that his base is shrinking. On his watch, rural populations continue to decline, and where they are steady or growing, traditional Conservative voters are being displaced by sea changes and tree changes. Further, many farmers see through the false promises and spin. They know better when Barnaby Joyce claims credit for commodity price rises over which he has no control. They also note the absence of any comment when other commodity prices are falling. And many see one of the biggest challenges for the land sector a changing climate, a drier climate, a hotter climate. But Barnaby Joyce ridicules serious responses to this challenge that we all collectively face. Worse, he runs deceitful campaigns against those policies in order to build political capital. The second problem is that Barnaby's responses are the antithesis to the siren call I've been talking about. Pork barrelling, boondoggles and spin designed to culture false hope are amongst the very things people are rebelling against. We now, for example, have a grain pork code which covers about no one, and a sugar code which is adversely affecting all the players in that sector. The relocation of the APVMA has been a disaster, yet he continues to pursue it despite all of our protests and warnings of the harm being done. But Exhibit A is the agriculture white paper, a potpourri of thought bubbles, some already failed, some yet to happen, and many which will never happen. Some based on nostalgia, some without any excuse or explanation whatsoever. Now, Barnaby Joyce is fond of the phrase, "we have money on the table." The problem is no one is picking up the money. And my real concern that this is part of the plan. These policies are designed to fail, but of course not until after the next election. Now, when last in office, Labor built many water irrigation projects, the Midlands project in Tasmania being the finest example. Just a couple of weeks ago, Bill Shorten promised we'd build another one in South Australia, and that project is ready to go. But in contrast, despite his constant dams rhetoric, Barnaby Joyce has not built a water project in 4 years, and not one project is in prospect. The Abbott government was quick to take credit for the China, Japan and South Korea preferential trade agreements, even though those deals were close to being signed off before the Abbott government came to office. But progress on the many protocols necessary to be concluded before those free trade agreements can be meaningful have been moving at snail's pace. The government has also displayed a lack of urgency over further prospective bilateral deals. I know that Indonesia, for example, is one of great interest to those here with us this morning. But my key point is that the elites in Canberra are telling the farmers that thanks to the FTAs, they've never had it so good. But that's not what the majority of growers and producers are feeling. Certainly not the ones I talk to, and certainly not the people I speak to in the grains industry, despite a relatively good year, and certainly not those I speak to in the dairy industry. No wonder people have the pitchforks out and they are on the march. Now, part of addressing inequality, or key to that process, is managing the new political dynamic. Now, part of it is prudent budget management. In the fiscal environment we face today, money will be tight for many years into the future. Beware those making big spending promises in the absence of new revenue or savings measures. And beware those who are making promises off budget, in inverted commas, that is off the Commonwealth budget, and before the economic analysis is done. Now, in recent months, Labor has proposed some very bold but prudent revenue measures. Changes to capital gains tax rules, changes to negative gearing arrangements, more recently changes to the tax treatment of trusts. These proposals are all about making our tax system fairer, but they're also about providing the revenue required to invest in the productive capacity of the economy and, of course, therefore, to create jobs. Now, Labor will always place Infrastructure Australia at the heart of the infrastructure investment decisions, making sure that too hard to find money is being directed to the projects which return for the nation the highest possible return. For the past 4 years, productivity has remained flat and our farmers continue to lose global market share. This has to change, and making the right decisions on rail, road, grain, port and telecommunications infrastructure is the key to both higher productivity and improving our international competitiveness. Of course, public sector investment is only part of the equation. and private sector investment is also critical, including, of course, foreign exchange. Unlike the current government, Labor will never play politics with foreign investment. It is the wrong message. It sends the wrong signals. Also critical to our productivity efforts and our competitiveness are research, development, extension and innovation. We're all fond of claiming that Australia's R&D model is the best in the world, and it may be. Labor certainly likes to think so because we developed it and implemented it. But 30 years on, is it really just safe to say that it's the best of the world? To make that assumption and to do nothing? I think not. Innovation will always be a key focus for me and my party, as will biosecurity, where funding certainty and continuity is desperately needed. That's why Labor took a promise to the last election to establish a biosecurity institute, an institute which would have covered the field. Many expressed concern to me about an ageing farm workforce. They asked me, how do we get the kids coming back to the farm? Well, my answer is always a simple one. They'll come back to the farm when they think they can make as much money doing that than they could following other pursuits which are options to them. Happily, some of them are already coming back to the farm. Things are changing. And when they come back, they bring new ideas, different ideas, and indeed they bring a different approach to natural resource development and allocation, and of course a different response to the challenges of a changing climate. You know, in life, the problem with constantly claiming you are special is that you end up being treated differently. In the long run, that special treatment can become a real curse, breeding false hope, complacency, resource misallocation and less than optimal economic outcomes. The agriculture sector often faces extraordinary variabilities which are beyond their control, the weather being, of course, the obvious example. That's why Labor, when it made its announcement on trust less than a week ago, carved out the farming sector. But recognising special challenges is different than accommodating special interests. I want young Australians to look at the agriculture and agribusiness sector and see a modern, innovative, wealth-creating sector which is focused on sustainable profitability in key premium markets, not a sector which needs to be treated preferentially to survive. That is the wrong message for them. It's the wrong signal for them. And achieving that outcome will require strong industry leadership and thoughtful strategic guidance from government. One of my great passions, what I see as lacking in the agriculture white paper, is that high-level strategic guidance, letting investors know what are the government's key interests and what the government intends to make the pathways of least resistance for investors. So working together, we can ensure investment returns are sustainably high. I've no doubt about that. And we can make sure that is the case at all points along the supply chain. Agriculture can't be healthy without a healthy supply chain, and we can't have a healthy supply chain without a healthy agriculture sector. It is all one supply chain, and it frustrates me when people in the agriculture sector see everyone outside the farm gate as not a friend but as an enemy. It is absolutely the wrong approach, and it's a view that you will never hear from me. And I know all of you aspire to the same things, and I know that you are all doing more than your bit, including, of course, Peter and the sponsors of this event this week. And, of course, over the course of the next few days, that's exactly what you will be doing. So I wish you well for a successful conference.
Thank you very much, Joel, for those words. Now, Joel has agreed that he will be happy to take a few questions if there are any from the floor. If there are, please, again, as usual, just state your name and where you are from. So, any questions? Okay, you're going to go. Yep.
Malcolm McMahon from Emerald Grain. Just a question on the taxation treatment for small enterprises. I know that Labor has said recently that they'll change this recent change to taxation for businesses under 50 million. It just seems to me that Mr. Shorten's very hypocritical in that in the past he supported such a change, publicly made a statement in that regard, and now when it sort of seems to be opportunistic, that he's appealing to the masses, if you like, not those who are creating business out there, but the ones who I think in a lot of cases are on welfare and are probably voting for any sort of a handout they can get. Why wouldn't you consider that a reasonable approach to support small business, in my opinion, create productivity, which doesn't seem to be the Labor Party platform at the moment?
Well, with respect, Malcolm, I think you missed the key point in my speech, and that was that the political dynamic is changing rapidly across the globe. And it was John Maynard Keynes who once said, when the facts change, I change my mind. And I don't think it's fair to say that a policy position change reflects a state of hypocrisy. What Bill Shorten has been doing is responding to the cause of the electorate, seeing the consequence for those who have been unwilling to do so elsewhere. I don't think you can describe anything he said or done as anti-business. I reject that absolutely. I've always said that the best thing a government can do for small business is to grow the economy, keep interest rates low and get out of the way. And despite its anti-regulatory rhetoric of earlier years, we've seen a very, very significant building and regulatory burden in recent years. I mentioned the Ports Code, for example, which is there to cover no one, but still extends a very heavy regulatory burden to everyone involved. So I reject that. I think Bill Shorten is on the right course. We cannot make the hard economic decisions unless we're taking the people with us. And if we don't start addressing the tax rorts, and the tax rorts in the trust arrangements is something not denied by anyone and absolutely growing. If we don't address the things that are driving the gap between the haves and the have-nots, we will not be in a strong position as politicians to make the hard economic decisions that this country needs.
Okay. Any further questions? Peter? Pat? Oh, sorry. Yep.
Is anyone going to ask me about test weights? Because Peter and I practiced it.
Don't go near test weight. Don't go near test weight. Okay.
我是来自中国的，我刚才没有留意听到第二点谈到关于这个投资的问题，我是这个世界各地对澳洲的这个农业的投资呢，还是澳洲的这个企业到世界各地去投资？第二个问题是，如果我们中国对澳洲的这个投资方面的话，有哪些优惠条件，或者是有哪些限制？
Right.
Have we got a translator there?
I thought Peter was going to translate that for me.
No. Could we just check we've got...
We've got translation down the back there. If someone can assist.
Just one sec.
If you like, you go to another question if there is one, and we can come back to it.
We'll come back to your question.
Okay.
Peter, you want
to... Peter Wilson, Pulse Australia at AGT Foods Australia. Joel, it's always a great pleasure to listen to you. One of the takeaway points is that clearly you sit in the frame where it's we don't get involved unless market failure is evident, and we let the markets fall where they may. Can you rule out bringing back that disgusting trucking legislation that was a time bomb set for the new government that would have put a whole host of small businesses, truckers off the road and make that task of carrying the nation's agricultural produce very, very expensive, to the point where it probably would have put a lot of grain businesses, particularly farmers, out of business? Can you rule that out?
Well, what I can rule out is politicising the issue in the way the current government did. And what I can rule out is any future construct that looked anything like the one we suffered last time around. What happened there was a good policy principle gone bad. And in fact, I had the fortunate opportunity to, at a wedding of all places, have a conversation with the Commissioner, the Fair Work Commissioner, that was involved in the implementation of that policy. That policy was very, very badly implemented. It was what's commonly known, to use the shorthand, a cluster. But the policy principle wasn't bad. We have a shocking rate of fatalities in the trucking industry. Why? Because people are driven to travel times and speeds that just don't add up. in safety terms. So I won't rule out a Labor government revisiting the issue, but I absolutely rule out the construct that was implemented last time around.
Okay, we're ready for... Oh. Okay. Yep.
Hello, this gentleman has two questions. First question is, if the Chinese investors are interested in investing in Australia in agriculture sector, do you have any preferential conditions or you have any conditions so that to limit the Chinese investors' investment?
Yeah. The Labor Party is very welcoming of Chinese investment in the agriculture and agribusiness sectors. Do you want to translate as I go, or would you like...
Oh, he's got a mic.
Oh, very good. Okay. We think that is critical to our future economic prosperity. The Labor Party will always maintain a non-discriminatory foreign investment regime. That means we believe that the same rules should apply to every investing country equally, and we are absolutely committed to that principle. Unfortunately, that is not the case here in Australia at the moment. In fact, that is anything but the case. We would never attach conditions per se, but what I would like to have discussions about is how we ensure that we maximise the broader economic benefits of foreign investment, how we ensure that people are making collateral investments, if you like, in things like natural resource management and the infrastructure investments that lift the productive capacity of the sector. So the short answer is yes, we are very welcoming of your investment.
Second question is, this gentleman wants to clarify, is Australia want to invest into the whole world in agriculture sector, or Australia want to attracting investment from all over the world in agriculture sector?
The question was whether Australia is interested in investing elsewhere. Yeah. Australia is always interested in investing elsewhere, and obviously we would like to extend our reach and our role in the global supply chain, but we are very small. We're a very large country geographically, a very large landmass, but we are a very small population. And the reason we are so welcoming of foreign investment is that we have a very small savings pool. So given we are a net importer of capital, we are unlikely to ever have a sufficient capital to be a big investor overseas, but there are very many entrepreneurs in Australia don't let that stand in their way, and of course we are extending their interest overseas. And a lot of people think that Australia has an abundance of natural resources, water and soil resources. Nothing could be further than the truth. We are the driest inhabited continent in the world, and our quality soils are very limited to a small number of regions. So our capacity to grow volume in the absence of new innovation is limited. And I do think there's an opportunity for Australia to grow volumes, though, in the global market by having investments and productive capacity in other countries, including China, we hope.
Okay, any further questions? If not, please join me again in thanking the Honourable Joel Fitzgibbon for his presentation today.
Thanks, everyone.